TDG at the movies. TDG at the movies. Cody goes to movies, and then he talks about them.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our very second edition of TDG at the Movies. Do you like things that go bump in the night, vampires, werewolves, etc.? Well, if you do, you might just want to stick around for this review, which is all about Sean Ellis's The Cursed. Now, before I get into my review for The Cursed, or The Cursed, as I like to call it, let me just tell you this is largely going to be spoiler-free, so feel free to enjoy this even if you haven't seen the film. The Curse takes place in the late 19th century in rural France. Now, it centers around a wealthy aristocratic family, and the head of the family, played by Alistair Petrie, he is embroiled in kind of a land dispute with a local gypsy tribe. Well, things come to a head, a war ensues, and of course the gypsies are able to employ ancient magic to help them in this battle. Now, let me go ahead and talk about some of the things I really enjoyed about this film and things I don't enjoy very much about this film. Now, I knew virtually nothing about this film before I went to see it. I saw it was playing at a local theater. It was a horror film that took place in the late 19th century, and I always like horror and period pieces, so I thought I'd go ahead and check it out. Now, this film does have that kind of atmosphere of kind of a Hammer film from the 70s and 80s that I really enjoyed that. I really thought that was very cool. It gives a real creepy vibe here. Now, I didn't know much of the actors. I knew hardly any of the actors going into it. I was delighted to see once it began that Kelly Reilly was in it. Kelly Reilly, of course, she was Mrs. Watson in the Sherlock Holmes films by Guy Ritchie. I know she's in Yellowstone. I haven't seen that. But I've seen some things with her, and I think she's a pretty good actress, so I thought that was pretty cool. I recognize virtually no other actors in this. The kind of father of the film, the head of the family. I had seen him in other things. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what I'd seen him in. Boyd Holbrook, I believe he was in Logan, but he's not a real big name actor either. So I think this film is genuinely well acted. I think the actors all do a fairly good job. I think Riley does a good job. She's both sympathetic she's a very sympathetic character, a mother who wants to protect her children and her family. Alistair Petrie was also very good as the father, the head of the family, who is trying to do his best, but is still kind of a scumbag who authorizes terrible acts of violence that there's really no justification for. And then, of course, Holbrook does a good job as kind of this outsider, a pathologist who has his own secret agenda and kind of gets caught in the middle of this war. This film, as I say, is genuinely creepy. There's some beautiful shots in the forest that seemed, it was just claustrophobic. And it kind of gave you that sense of you didn't know where the horror and the evil was going to come from. There's a supernatural element to this film that is pretty strong, and it gets quite intense at times. And that I like that quite a bit. There are some practical special effects here too that really serve the film well that I also enjoyed quite a bit. There is one scene in particular in this film, early on in the film, that is absolutely horrifying and some brutal acts of violence, and it's one of those, the way it is shot, I won't go too much into it, but the way it's shot and the perspective you have on this is so chilling and disconnected in a way that as soon as I saw it, I thought this scene is brilliant. And I was very much thinking if it can maintain this and do this throughout the rest of the film, this will be a truly great film. So there was a scene early on that was just absolutely brilliant, absolutely loved it, and I think does succeed in generally setting a tone for the rest of the film. Now, there are some bad things about this film, of course. First of all, I mentioned there are some practical effects that are quite well done, but there's also some CGI, and I feel like I kind of wish this film did not have the CGI. I think it kind of would have benefited more if it had just been practical, or if it had to have CGI, less of it. You know, the kind of the Jaws less is more approach. I kind of felt the CGI elements of the film kind of took away from the atmosphere a little bit. It was one of those things where, you know, I'm really getting sucked into the story and the events, and then you see that, and there's the kind of that little light bulb in your head that says, oh wait, I'm watching a movie. That kind of took me out of the film a little bit. Now there's also some ambiguity. There's some weird things going on here, because it takes place in France, but you have characters that have English accents and Irish accents. You have Irish names. You have Scottish names. of course, and then the French names. And so that kind of was a little ambiguous too. I kind of felt like maybe the story would have been served better if they had kind of streamlined this, just made them all French, or kind of, because honestly, I was fairly certain the story was taking place in France, but then I was saying, no, wait a second, are they in Ireland? I had a hard time figuring some things out, and I really think a little more streamlining of the characters, their names, heaven forbid their accents, probably would have gone a long way to again sucking me in further into the film. As it is, this was another thing that kind of reminded me I was watching a movie. Now, there's another element in the film. It's hinted at right at the very beginning of the film that there is some friction between some characters. And I'm not going to go into it. I don't want to give any spoilers away. But they kind of set up a big plot point for this early on in the film. And they never really follow through with it. It never really comes to fruition. And they don't really do anything with it. And you're kind of expecting some big resolution of this, some big comment on it, but nothing. And that was disappointing. So that was a little distracting too, is, oh, well, we're almost down to the wire and they haven't figured this out, and then nothing comes of it. So that was a bit distracting too. Overall, despite my problems with this film, I think The Cursed was a really fun, good horror movie that transported me back to another place in time. You know, so many horror films these days are just these kind of PG-13, aimed at teens that are just filled with jump scares, and that's pretty much all they've got on offer. And this film really had more. It had some genuine creepiness, it had some thoughtfulness. The best horror, ultimately, is even when you have supernatural forces. It is the deep, dark regions of the human soul that are often the scariest things of all. So I really enjoyed this film, and I'm going to go ahead and, out of a scale of 5 Cody points, I'm going to award The Cursed 4 Cody points. Well, let me know what you think. Is this a movie you've seen? Do you agree with me or disagree with me? If you haven't seen it yet, do you think you'll check it out? Really would like to know the answers to these questions, and let me know if you want to see more TDG at the movies. Until then, bonsoir.
TDG at the movies. TDG at the movies. Cody goes to movies, and then he talks about them.